So thank you all very much for joining us today. All of us at Health Excel here are really excited to share our latest industry report with you. So my name is Tess Huss and I'm the head of market research at Health Excel. For those of you who are not familiar with Health Excel, we are a community for digital health and provide advisory services to key stakeholders in the digital health space, helping them to find partners and solve challenges. The purpose of today's webinar is specifically to discuss part 2 of our digital therapeutics go-to-market report. And to give you some additional context, late last year, we launched part 1 of this report, which was focused on the employer route to market. Part 2 of the report, on the other hand, is focused on the pharma and direct-to-consumer routes to market. And our discussion today will focus on these 2 routes. So some of you may know, we have been tracking the digital therapeutic space really closely for the last number of years. And we released our first report on this topic in 2018. And in a really short space of time, I guess, we've gone from trying to differentiate a digital therapeutic from broader digital health solutions, and have gone from general definition ambiguity to a state where the definitions are clearer and help to delineate the space. Companies are able to break out and separate themselves from the crowd of broader digital health solutions, specifically because they are different. Digital therapeutics is now that term that differentiates. It implies that the solution is patient-facing, software-driven, and making a claim about treating, managing, or preventing a condition. It also implies that a solution is not just an intervention, but crucially, it is an evidence-based intervention. So fast forward 3 to 4 years, and this space has evolved at a rapid pace, so much so that we recently released a report on prescription digital therapeutics, or PDTs, which is really a subset of digital therapeutics. So we're becoming a lot more niche. And now we are at a stage where I guess we are moving away from needing to define the market, and where the focus has moved to how do we get digital therapeutics into the hands of patients? How do we actually commercialize these solutions and decide the correct route to market for a digital therapeutic? At Health Excel, we are continuously researching this space, and I'm sure that our 2-part report on this topic will provide you with some answers, and equally, or hopefully, facilitate some interesting discussions. So before we start digging into the topic, I wanted to let you know that the full report is available exclusively for our members, and my colleague Megan will drop a link to this in the chat shortly. So to help set the scene for our panel discussion, my colleagues from the Health Excel advisory team who are on the line will present some of the key findings from our report. But before they present the content, I would really like to give our expert panel a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. So if you could just let the audience know who you are and who you work for, that would be really great. So maybe Mette, you'd like to start?
I can do that. Hi, my name is Mette Dyberg. I'm the founder of MyMe. We are an autoimmune solution in the direct-to-consumer space. It's really a space that has been underserved for a long time, and it's predominantly women. So it's been a high focus, both as femtech has been rising, but most certainly also as COVID long haul has started to play a larger and larger role in this complex area of the world.
Great to have you, Mette. Susanne?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Suzanne. I'm currently the Vice President for Pharma Partnerships at Sidekick Health. Sidekick Health is a DTx company, and we are developing digital therapeutics for multiple lifestyle-related chronic diseases. Before that, I also worked for 19 years for Novartis Pharma, and for the last 5 years also being the global digital solutions head for the respiratory franchise, also launching digital therapeutics together with startups.
Really great to have you. Pierre?
Hello, everyone. I'm Pierre Laurent. I'm the founder and CEO of Voluntis, a digital therapeutics company focused on augmenting existing therapies. So we have a number of active collaborations with pharmaceutical companies across disease areas. Voluntis got acquired by a group called Aptar last fall. So I am now co-leading the digital health division at Aptar Pharma, which is a world leader in drug delivery devices.
Great, thank you, Pierre. And lastly, Ethan?
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Ethan. I work at Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, helping to build out our digital business unit. We focus specifically in mental and behavioral health, but we are really building a portfolio to address the unmet needs in mental and behavioral health through digital means. So our end goal is not to end up selling more drugs. It is really to approach the market and approach these problems through digital means. Before I was at Otsuka, I spent some time in the venture community doing early stage digital health and med tech. So excited to talk with everyone today.
Thank you, Ethan, and thank you all. We're really delighted to have such a great expert panel today. So before I hand off to my colleagues who will walk you through some key pages of the report, I'd just like to mention that hopefully we will also be joined by Kirk Kefauver, who is the head of digital health within the biomedicines business unit of Eli Lilly. So Kirk should be joining us about halfway into the webinar. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Aletta and Megan.
Thank you so much, Tess. So my name's Aletta. I'm a Digital Health Innovation Manager here at Health Excel. And Megan and I were delighted to walk you through a summary of the second half of our Routes to Market report today. I'm going to start by walking you first through the pharma route to market. So this route is particularly well suited to DTx solutions that have completed rigorous clinical validation studies, have obtained regulatory approval, and ideally also can demonstrate traction, scalability, for example, through previous commercial partnerships. There's a lot of value to both the pharma and the DTx partner in the partnership. On the pharma side, both standalone and combination DTx present different opportunities across the patient journey, and we've marked these out in the diagram there on the right-hand side. So if we think about the patient journey in the 5 stages of patient identification and diagnosis, treatment decision, treatment monitoring, symptom management, and adherence, then combination DTx has most impact in those latter stages of the journey, specifically in patient activation and adherence, while standalone DTx present opportunities across the entire journey, crucially including market entry. There are many additional benefits of DTx to pharma, and these include on the left-hand side, firstly, patient outcomes, so that intrinsic therapeutic effect of the DTx, as well as the potential to manage and impact the side effect profile of a traditional drug, as well as access to data. So DTx vendors have constant access to real-time patient data, which is difficult for pharma to access through other routes, for example, surveys or registries. Not to mention agility. So DTx companies are very agile and nimble with experience in that rapid product development cycle of digital products. And then finally, DTx provide pharma an opportunity for a much greater patient interaction and a deeper understanding of needs on that patient journey. On the DTx side in blue, the pharma partnership clearly represents financial value. So pharma brings attractive economical value to the partnership for a DTx company. And then secondly, beyond financial value, a pharma partnership also demonstrates commercial attraction for the DTx, as well as access to an experienced sales force. So pharma has a huge capacity to scale with sales and marketing capabilities that can support scale up of the DTx. And then finally, pharma also has a wealth of regulatory and scientific expertise that can really benefit that future development of a DTx. So despite these opportunities, what we're seeing is that not all pharma organizations have incorporated digital health into their strategy. So we wanted to ask the question, what's the status quo and where are we now? To answer the question, we extracted deals and partnership information from the Health Excel platform to analyze all pharma DTx partnerships in the period 2016 to 2021. And what we saw was a steady increase in pharma DTx partnerships with a total of 9 partnerships in the last calendar year. What this really shows is that pharma is beginning to explore the digital opportunity a lot more, to the point of considering standalone digital revenue models. And when we looked at the deal types then, in the period analyzed, 67% of partnerships focused on digital companions, while 29% centered more on standalone DTx. And we found this really resonates with the Health Excel community. And when we asked the question what the focus will be for pharma companies in the next 18 to 24 months, 80%, the majority said combination DTx, while just 20% said standalone DTx. So where are we now and where are we going? Well, if we start with the here and now on the left-hand side, as we've just seen, the number of pharma DTx partnerships have been steadily growing since 2016. The most active therapeutic areas for these partnerships are diabetes, oncology, and respiratory health. And through conversations with the Health Excel community, it's widely agreed upon that pricing models for DTx will in many cases become more outcomes-based and that startups are best positioned to explore these flexible pricing models. It's also clear that pharma companies are increasing their internal expertise in digital health. However, we do believe that more can be done to have software developers from the pharma side involved in these collaborations with DTx companies to really ensure appropriate technical collaboration is possible on top of the commercial collaboration. And what about the future? So where are we going? Well, currently budgeting for digital tends to open up once the drug is being commercialized. So the trend really seems to be retrofitting those digital products to the drug. So developing these digital products alongside a drug will likely yield much more valuable products, but it would require a change in mindset internally, specifically from leadership. So we're not quite there yet when it comes to the widespread adoption of standalone DTx by pharma companies. From a pharma point of view, it's still difficult to assess the true value of the standalone DTx as it's not yet well established. But from a financial perspective, reimbursement for these solutions must become comparable to existing therapies to be a viable business model for pharma. On the other hand, patient data collection is widely considered to be one of the most valuable assets that pharma can bring to DTx can bring to pharma, yet presently its usage is underexplored. And with that, I will hand you over to Megan.
Thanks, Aletta. My name is Megan Shadle. I'm a digital health consultant at Health Excel and look forward to talking with you about this next section, which will be focused on direct to consumer or the D2C route to market. With this route, the evidence requirements and barriers to entry can be lower. It's also best suited for prevention solutions and those that cover a broad spectrum of disease. This route allows solutions to market their offerings directly to users. These types of solutions are available to users without a prescription and are paid for out of pocket. Our Health Excel community believes the D2C route is the third most scalable and sustainable commercialization model. At the early stages of D2C DTx, most solutions were focused on therapeutic areas such as mental health, chronic conditions, and gut health. As shown in the graph in the bottom right corner, we're now seeing an expansion into many new therapeutic areas such as oncology, ophthalmology, and respiratory conditions. However, even with the expansion of TAs, D2C is still not the ideal route to market for niche conditions or those that may require a doctor to interpret results or findings. We conducted a global survey of consumers to sense check their familiarity with and willingness to pay out of pocket for D2C solutions. Eligible respondents were located in the US, EU, UK, or APAC region. The survey showed us that consumers are largely still unfamiliar with the difference between DTx and a digital health solution. Of the 92 individuals we heard from, 42% would classify the Apple Watch as a digital therapeutic. Only 12% of the individuals surveyed said they would seek out a DTx as a way to treat an existing condition, as compared to 66% for general wellness and 22% for disease prevention. This tells us there's still room to increase awareness of the benefits and potential of DTx among consumers. The survey showed a high willingness to pay out of pocket for digital health solutions. However, when consumers felt the product was something that should be covered by their insurance, they weren't willing to pay for it. This showed the distinction between what consumers are and aren't willing to pay for out of pocket is nuanced. D2C solutions may be free of charge, available via one-time purchase, or through a subscription model. Of consumers surveyed, 39% were willing to pay between $150 and $300 for a 3-month subscription to a digital therapeutic. When considering cost and value, consumers may be more willing to pay for solutions that replace the need for an expensive drug or intervention. However, when, for example, a sleep solution costs $150 versus a much less expensive package of melatonin tablets, it may be challenging for the consumer to justify the price difference. Finding the right price point will be dependent on the solution's value to the consumer as it compares to the cost of existing drug treatments or therapies. So when looking at where we're at and where we're going, there are 3 high-level points to consider. The first point, evidence generation is costly, making the low barrier to entry for D2C attractive. Entering the market through this route creates an opportunity to collect real-world evidence that can demonstrate the benefits of a solution. However, this can also lead to an overpromise of solutions due to a lack of monitoring and advertising claims. For solutions that are able to demonstrate a benefit through real-world evidence, we may see them use D2C as a stepping stone to longer-term B2B models. The second point to consider, currently DTx prevention solutions have shown the greatest potential to be sustainable D2C as opposed to treatment solutions. Consumers are not yet familiar enough with the idea of using a DTx to treat a disease and may require the support of a doctor to interpret and explain data, specifically for niche conditions. As consumers become more familiar with DTx that address broad conditions, we may see a shift in willingness to also use DTx as a treatment modality. And the third consideration, consumers display a high willingness to pay out of pocket for digital products in general. As the therapeutic areas for D2C DTx continue to grow, we anticipate a positive shift to take place with respect to out-of-pocket payments for over-the-counter DTx. This report was co-authored across our internal expert research team, and we wanted to briefly finish with the presentation today by acknowledging the contributions from the Health Excel advisory team. And we also want to thank the experts from our digital health community who reviewed the report and shared their inputs. And with that, I'll hand things back over to Tess and the panel. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you both so much, Aletta and Megan. So yeah, I guess let's pick up on some of this really, really great content. So I guess when I was preparing for today's session, I really wanted the audience to walk away with some answers to some key questions. And I thought of kind of 4 broad ones. So namely, how do pharma and digital therapeutics collaborations start? And what makes a good partner? What's in store for digital therapeutics in the near term? And will digital therapeutics disrupt traditional pharma revenue streams? And when is D2C a viable and also advantageous distribution model? So those are the kind of the 4 broad questions that I'd really like us to dig into. You know, it's quite ambitious given we only have 40 minutes or so, but I think let's get started. So first off, let's start with the pharma and digital therapeutics collaboration. So as we saw just now, and as Aletta spoke to, there's a lot happening in the digital therapeutics space. A lot of pharma companies are interested in exploring digital therapeutics or are already actively working in this space. But how do these collaborations get started and how do they materialize? Who are the decision makers inside pharma companies and what drives these collaborations forward? So maybe Pierre, I can start with you and ask you about your experience with kickstarting collaborations. Are collaborations really easily started via cold call emails?
Sure, thank you. Happy to share some of our experience. We usually engage in the form of licensing and co-development agreements with pharma. So, typically what we do at Voluntis on our Aptar is really to license our platform and to also engage into some co-development activities to make sure that we fulfill the specific needs of certain treatments. So there are different ways we engage with pharma. Traditional BD&L discussions. So we proactively, engage with pharma and talk about, these kind of licensing opportunities. And in an increasing number of cases, we also engage in as part of RFP processes. So some pharma companies are now, getting to a certain level of comfort and maturity around digital therapeutics to look for partners. And in that particular case, we may, respond to these incoming requests. I think that's the majority of our collaboration structure that way. Sometimes we have seen also collaboration starting around clinical studies, even prior to executing a long-standing agreement. Sometimes there is let's say a clinical evaluation phase where there is a case for partnering to let's say validate certain hypotheses for let's say treatment improvement. I don't know if you have other experiences, maybe on those lines, maybe Susanne.
Maybe Susanna or Matthew.
Yeah, so I would probably categorize different approaches. So there is this experimental approach when pharma companies maybe want to explore something and pioneer, and many of those companies have incubators like the Novartis Biome, for instance, where you can get in touch with startup companies. Then the second cluster, I would say, is more around RFPs, as Pierre mentioned. So if there's a more concrete idea and pain point that needs to be solved, then maybe an RFP can be a good process to find the right partner. But even more, I think also what Pierre said at the beginning, I see for the future that it's really about finding the right strategic partner, also earlier in the life cycle of a drug development, to see what is a good fit regarding a digital therapeutic, and really looking into combination therapies. And then it's more like a BD&L kind of partnership where you discuss also different objectives, milestones you set up together. So this is how I would cluster potential approaches and how they get started.
Yeah, and I think interestingly, we see collaborations that start also at different stages of the medication life cycle, by the way. So it's the majority of our partnerships have been executed to support drugs already on the market. But I am I definitely see that as the market evolves, we are probably going to start earlier than that. We have done some work to support a drug that was in phase 2 development on starting phase 3. I think we'll start to see increasingly pharma turning to look for digital companions to their treatments earlier, even ahead of a product launch moving forward.
Great. Yeah, I'm sure we'll dig into some of those points a little later. But sorry, Ethan, you were coming off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important when you're starting or when you're reaching out to pharma to try to form these partnerships that you have an understanding of what it is that you want out of it. So there's like the report and my colleagues were just talking about. I think there's a whole bunch of different ways that you could potentially work with a pharma. So it could be a license agreement, it could be an equity investment, it could be all sorts of different things. And so I think going in, having an understanding of what it is that you need from them is important in finding success.
Great. And on that piece, I think, Susanna, you spoke about it, that strategic fit. So what really makes a good partner for pharma, or equally what makes a good partner for a digital therapeutic? What are some of the key qualities that you'd really be hoping for when you strike those partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's actually a key success factor for successful long-term partnerships as well, that both company strategies fit to each other. And I have seen that in my Novartis life, that sometimes you talk to startups and they rely too much on pharma requests, but being 100% clear on their own business model and business objective. And I think that's essential. And of course, the same is true for the pharma partner, that they have a long-term strategy, what they want to achieve as a DTx partner. And it's not just a marketing thing they want to do for a year. And then I think it's set up for success going on a journey. And we know it can be a roller coaster as well, going on that journey together with shared objectives and being really crystal clear what both parties want to get out of it.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, strategic alignment is key. I mean, to establish the collaboration on a good ground. From our vantage point, I mean, repeatedly we've seen pharma looking at different types of criteria when they seek a partner. Like, for example, like their capabilities. Whether they have also experience or a track record in that space. Whether they can leverage an existing platform to develop their digital solutions. So a platform helps to accelerate or also de-risk some of these initiatives. Some also specific capabilities when we talk about regulated solutions. For example, who is the legal manufacturer of these solutions? Is it the pharma taking this role, or is it the DTx partner that should fulfill these responsibilities? So there is an important, let's say, work being done to share really clearly the roles and responsibilities in the collaboration. And then there are other things that pharma look into, like I don't know, QMS type of things, like quality management systems, certifications, global capabilities. More of these projects span across multiple countries around the world. So it's also interesting for pharma to be able to partner in multiple geographies. And finally, I would say the teams are important because in some cases what we have, I mean, for example, 10 years ago we created a medical affairs group on a QA and regulatory affairs group. And it's nice to also have the right counterparts, I think, in the collaboration that can mirror the existing teams at pharma, so that people speak the same language. these collaborations are multifaceted, so it requires a lot subject matter experts to liaise directly it's important to also be in a position to facilitate this kind of let's say project teams that mimic a little bit the ones that we see at Pharma.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there's two more little ones that I would add. The first is maybe an alignment on expectations as you're going in. I think how long things should take or should take at a startup versus how long they probably will take at a pharma company are two totally different things. And so having an understanding of that going in is pretty important. And then similar to the team, it's and complementary members there, it's probably alignment on mission and vision. So this is a really, once you sign the partnership, it's long-term collaboration, and there's going to be probably rocky parts through it. And so knowing that you're aligned with mission and vision on both sides and can get along with the team, and there's people that you want to work with there, I think that ultimately helps in success too.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have people that share the same vision, and I think it's within pharma it's important also to have champions, that because those are clearly new topics for a number of pharma companies. So it's important to have people that really can drive these initiatives forward. Plus, also I think executive sponsorship. You mentioned that in your report. I think it is important because you engage typically in multi-year strategic partnerships. So it's important that this kind of new initiatives are supported at the highest level of these organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, Kirk. You haven't missed much yet, so great to have you join us as well.
Thanks. Sorry for the delay.
Not at all. That's great. We just spoke about what makes a good pharma partner in a digital therapeutics pharma collaboration. So maybe moving on from that, I suppose since a lot of these relationships are starting to mature a little bit more, really are pharma and digital therapeutics partnerships always mutually beneficial? I think we've seen a lot of kind of opinions on that could kind of go either way, and I'd be quite curious to get the panel's take on this. Are they always beneficial, or should we potentially construct deals a little bit differently that would always allow both sides to win? Get your takes on that.
I mean, clearly it requires alignment on success criteria. I mean, because sometimes it's not always crisp, and because there are a number of dimensions against which these partnerships can be measured. So it's hard to answer generally about this question, because you look at multiple types of objectives that pharma is pursuing in this partnership. So it's not a black and white question, I think. So you have clear successes that are demonstrated, and we can talk about it further. But there are also things that still are let's say linked to the early stage of the market, I think, and that we have I think gone through a number of let's say experimental collaborations over the past 10 years. I think the market has learned a lot, quite frankly, based on this initial work, and now that the market has grown in maturity, I believe so. And I think stakeholders are a little more, let's say, educated these days when it comes to defining success and spending the right amount of energy and focus on that.
And I think it's important. I mean, we talk about partnerships, right? Not like a vendor-buyer relationship. So if we talk about partnerships, everyone should have a benefit out of it. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. And I think one of the key aspects we need to solve together is really a sustainable go-to-market and business model. So I think this is where sometimes projects struggled, from my experience, that the business model long-term is maybe not clearly defined, and then the questions come up: what is the return on invest, and et cetera, et cetera. But this has to be decided and defined very early in the partnership, so to avoid disappointments. And I think Ethan said it, to really have a clear, defined goal and objective, how we measure success of this partnership.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, if you take the example of like a digital therapeutic combined with a medicine, like hopefully we're all focused on patient outcomes. which is the root of all of it, right? And there is a complementary role. Like, I don't know of any disease, I mean, there's a few probably, but most diseases aren't just solved with medications. And most diseases aren't just solved with, behavioral tools and support without the medication. So I think there's naturally like the symbiotic opportunity here, but I think your point is exactly right, is like, how does the business model get satisfied of each side? So, if the pharma company views that collaboration as actually a bit of a threat because people won't use medication if they're using more of the behavioral therapeutic, or vice versa. So I think that's kind of the bridge to jump over, is where is that kind of mutual long-term value that's sitting in both business models.
Thanks, Kirk. Mette, is there anything, I suppose, that you would like to see in sort of how these deals are constructed that you think would set them up for mutual success?
So we chose to be a consumer company, right? But obviously, you have, as a company in a new space, you have to sort of be educating not only yourself, but also the market around you. And, I've had plenty of conversations, I believe, with pretty much everyone on this call over the years, because it's interesting to see, how do we look at this space from different angles. And in some cases, they will right now, right? We've had an enormous amount of pharma interest and have decided never to go with any of them because they simply weren't spot on. And I think as a small company, you have to stay on point. And if you don't have a focus, it's very easy anywhere. And so from my perspective, is there anything that pharma could do to work with startups? Well, the reality is that either the startup is ready for it or it's not. It's not necessarily for the small one to change the big one. But I think Ethan hit the head on the nail earlier when it was like, the reality is, as a startup, once you work with somebody who's extremely slow, it actually just feels like it slows you down too, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that was an answer to anything, but a little blurb from here.
Yep, it was great. Okay, well, let's move on then and talk a little bit about the current state of pharma digital therapeutics partnerships. So again, our research has shown that at present, when pharma companies engage with digital therapeutics, they do so by adding a digital component, or by, I suppose, adding the digital therapeutic to existing treatments. And I think you all pretty much already touched on this topic, but it's generally acknowledged that, presently there is a tendency to retrofit rather than incorporate digital at the earliest in the drug development process. And I'd be quite curious to get your kind of takes or opinions on what might explain the hesitancy to go down the true combination route and to go down that route a lot earlier.
Yeah, maybe I get started. I think it's understandable, because if you develop a drug and let's say you're in phase 3 and you get ready for your setting up your submission trials and getting ready for an approval, naturally pharma companies try to minimize the risk on that compound, so to make sure it's a smooth process to approval. And if you add a digital therapeutic at that point, which is still new to many of the clinical people and members, that could add a risk. So I think what we need to do on the DTx side is really come with products that already have a strong clinical evidence to build the confidence in the product, being clear on the mode of action, on the endpoints we address and we change, so that the planning for the trial program and the objectives can be done better and risk can be minimized. But I think it's still a bit of path to follow and education that needs to be done there.
But also, to follow up on what Suzanne says, is I think, we started seeing very early on patterns in, let's say, lupus patients on Benlysta. They typically have a couple of days right after injection where they're feeling a little flu-like. Then they have, 2.5 weeks that are great. And then the last week before the next injection, they're typically flaring. And we started to see that after 8 weeks of a behavioral protocol, we could actually prevent that flaring from happening. And so there's no doubt that in the future, we are going to see drugs paired with behavioral solutions because it simply makes sense. But Susanna makes a great point, and it's also why none of the companies, at least in my arena, has done anything, because unless something is out of patent and not really doing well, nobody would take the chance. It's simply too big of a risk pairing at this stage, but it's going to be coming a lot sooner, I think, than any of us even can imagine.
I think it's, useful to also look at, the early examples of this combination, products. There are some that have been already introduced in different markets around the world. So, a significant number of them has really been also involving some device technologies, by the way, around drugs. If you look at it, especially in specialty pharma, where you have drug delivery systems that help with drug administration. And these systems also have started to become more connected, being able to send, for example, administration data to the cloud so that we can better monitor adherence and take action on this kind of follow-up. And now I think some companies have started to look at combined products, starting from the drug, involving the drug delivery system, connecting the drug delivery systems, and then going to the last mile, which is to provide software solutions alongside these combination therapies to optimize, let's say, an integrated solution. The goal being really ultimately to improve patients' experience with their treatments. And I think that's really the why. Now you're going to see, I think, increasingly a number of more, let's say, sophisticated products that embed, both molecules, hardware technology and electronics, the digital components, and in some cases, as we just discussed, sometimes healthcare services, also to make sure that it's coordinated, for example, with the patient support program, coordinating with the right level of human intervention, also to make sure that we provide the right support at the right time in the treatment journey. So it's going to be I think we are going to see more of these, let's say, combined approaches moving forward, even though they are, still, rare in the market today. But I think specialty pharma especially is going to drive, let's say, a significant momentum in that area.
So I think I totally agree. I think we're going to start to see more of it, but for me, it's maybe more practical reasons. I think that one is just timing, right? So if they started developing a drug, I don't know, 10 years ago to get through the trials, that was a long time before a lot of these digital therapeutics had any efficacy or, even existed as technologies. And so I think that's a part of it. And going forward, as more of these start to get incorporated into phase 2 and 3 trials. And then the other part is I think there's just a different knowledge set for digital therapeutics and digital products. And so the folks that are running clinical trials, I think that there's a gap between what they think are digital therapeutics and how to incorporate those versus the way that digital therapeutics companies are actually thinking about it.
Yeah. I feel like, to your point, the scientific collaboration where you actually study the two together is going to take a little bit more time, given the points made about the dependencies that puts then on each company. But maybe in the shorter run, there's an opportunity for more commercial type partnerships where, if the pharma company can offer access to patients that get a prescription, the opportunity to participate in a behavioral-based digital therapeutic program, that with the spirit of trying to get to ultimate patient outcomes with the combination of medicine and behavior or insights, and then the return on that is what Meta was kind of talking about, is some of the insights that come back that are super valuable. So there might be, I guess I feel like there's probably an opportunity for more commercial collaborations in the shorter run while we figure out how to scientifically, study these things together.
I think, Kirk, you mentioned before, right, that digital therapeutics have a role to play also in maybe preventing certain things and the lifestyle change that cannot be solved by a drug, which is often related to chronic diseases. And my learning also now being on the startup side is really we need to translate a bit what this mode of action is of cognitive behavior therapy and helping patients to build healthy habits, to change their lifestyle, and how that impacts really clinical parameters, so that it's really having a direct impact on the patient condition and its quality of life. So we really work on to details now for all of our DTxs to define very clearly the mode of action and the clinical impact. So to have the same language with clinical people on the pharma side, so that they understand also better how a digital therapeutics actually works.
Yeah. That's great. And actually, we have a question here from the audience, and I think it's addressed to you, Ethan, about whether you might be able to elaborate on how pharma approaches digital therapeutics that is different from how digital therapeutics would like them to. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just kind of elaborating on that point a little.
Sure. So I think I'll give the lawyer clause up front that it probably depends on the pharma partnership that or the pharma company that you want to work with. But I think the capabilities that a digital product can bring, both from an efficacy standpoint and an access or whatever the main value propositions of the digital therapeutics are, is different than the way that a person who's been in clinical trials and who's trying to bring drugs to market, or who has for a long time, thinks about the clinical effect and the endpoints of that trial and things like that. And so I think that it's not a matter of ignorance or anything like that, but more so just a lack of, I mean, that kind of is ignorance, but a lack of understanding, right? It's an education opportunity for those folks to say, okay, there are digital therapeutics or that can act as primary or secondary endpoints that maybe we haven't thought about before, or that can add efficacy to the drug that you're trying to bring to market.
Okay, great. I guess moving into, again, kind of related to the future state of pharma digital therapeutics partnerships, and I'd like us to deep dive a little bit on the standalone digital therapeutics model. So currently, as I think Aletta spoke to this point, currently it looks as though pharma companies are less interested in a standalone digital therapeutic. So I'm wondering, do you foresee digital therapeutics becoming more of a priority in the future? Sorry, standalone digital therapeutics, that is. And when can we expect standalone digital therapeutics to contribute to pharma revenues in a meaningful manner? So maybe, Susanna, I could address that one to you, since I know you're kind of moving or interested in that space, exploring that space.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, if you look at digital therapeutics and the revenue stream, right? I mean, currently, I think many startups still build also their commercial pathways on the pharma partnerships. And but as more and more countries and markets also open a reimbursement pathway, I think that also opens the door for standalone digital therapeutics, which still drives the question, who is then doing all the promotion of the digital therapeutics? Because that's another benefit. Often if you collaborate with pharma, that you can use their sales channels. And but of course, we also see now with COVID accelerated that more and more of the drug promotion also happens via omni-channels, and not just the traditional medical rep face-to-face to a physician. But the physician then is also the bottleneck. If you have a prescribable therapeutic, even if it's reimbursed, you need the physician to prescribe it. Going directly to consumer with a digital therapeutic, I personally believe is more difficult, even if I saw in the report that willingness seems to be high to pay for it out of pocket. I personally have my doubts, but I mean, of course, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise. But I think the challenge in Europe, of course, is a bit that every market is different, but now with SIGA and other countries following that, I think there's a great opportunity in front of us that will play a bigger role in the future.
Yeah. I agree, and I think it's you see. I mean, I think very successful collaborations in many cases anchored because in the companion approach, because it's really is well rooted in with the brand strategy. Sometimes standalone digital therapeutics might be a little too far out from the core business of pharma. Sometimes it's, let's say, considered as ancillary projects, not necessarily extremely aligned on with the key objectives of the brands are. So that's, I guess, one of the risks. And I agree with you, Susan. I think what we're seeing is that still pharma is watching closely the advances in market access pathways in different countries around the world. And I think in certain therapeutic areas, particularly, these avenues can be of interest for pharma to capitalize on. But it's also interesting to see that if you look at globally, there are very few countries that have reached a certain level of, let's say, maturity in market access pathways. So the vast majority of countries still don't have that. So you see also some let's say hybrid strategies where in certain, let's say, mature markets you'll follow a reimbursement route, whereas in other markets you might offer the solution really at no cost alongside your drugs if it helps advance treatment experience on the drug positioning in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it is an opportunity potentially, and to the points though, that is a couple things. One is that reimbursement side of it. Like, until that opens up, I think it's going to be difficult for pharma to go in too deep into this. And then the revenue side. So if you're a pharma company with a strong medicines pipeline, the type of revenue you can generate from digital therapeutics is not even in the ballpark of the revenue from a medicine. So I think the pharma companies that maybe the pipeline is not fantastic, and they're looking for opportunities for additional revenue, and the path to reimbursement opens up, I think we could see some things. I mean, from a commercial standpoint, I feel like promoting a digital, at least digital prescribable therapeutic, is very similar to the pharma business. So I think that commercial engine can really turn on once the opportunity opens up.
Great. Just, I suppose, picking up on something Susanna said earlier, where I suppose the D2C model was somewhat criticized. Mette, I was wondering if there was anything you wanted to say in response to that.
It's tough for me because we chose to be a consumer company, since the burden has really been on consumers in our autoimmune space. Mimi started because there was no solution within the healthcare system, and specialty pharma fails 3 out of 4 patients. So when we're talking about these things, I think that plays.
She's building
suspense. It's a very big part of how there's just not that obvious fit. Is the Wi-Fi bad?
Yeah, unfortunately, we did lose you there.
Oh, sorry. Well, maybe that's the case. Is that at the end of the day, it's not just you that lost me. Specialty pharma failed 3 out of 4 patients, and so in a way, a lot of people are lost in the system. And Mimi was started because there is no solvable solution within the healthcare, and so we hired experts on market access before we started, and there really wasn't any market access through the traditional system. And so our mission became to be affordable and accessible in the direct-to-consumer space, which is where the burden on consumers lied anyways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just very briefly, from your experience just on this notion of consumers being willing to pay out of pocket, but not always, the kind of nuance around that, what is your experience in relation to that?
So, the reality is that an autoimmune patient undergoes 5 to 7 years on sort of their journey prior to diagnosis, and on average spend $89,000 out of pocket. And so money is being spent every single day in our space. It's just a matter of how you talk to the clients. I think if you say you're selling a digital technology, you probably can't sell anything. But if you're selling them a solution to a problem that really affects them in the day-to-day, of course you can sell something. I think that's that's one of the things that's going to be important, is meeting the clients where they are.
Okay, so I suppose unbeknownst to us, the Q&A has been very much hopping, and with just 10 minutes left, I think it's time we move to some of the audience questions. So I quite like this one. So once you have a partnership, this person is wondering, what is next? How do you get HCPs and patients to really adopt it? Who, and in this case, pharma versus the DTx, is actually responsible for that adoption piece? And then they're wondering as well, is it pharma with their Salesforce team? I think that's a really great question, and one that probably many are wondering. Who would like to take this? How will we foster adoption?
I mean, it's a combination of different channels that are being used, I think, to help healthcare professionals get to know these solutions. So the Salesforce is active, yes, but I mean, pharma has also other types of teams, that are involved in this kind of efforts. So you have also medical teams. You have key account management teams sometimes who are in discussions with payers, for example, in different markets. You have also digital, let's say, approaches that pharma uses these days also to so it's multi let's say faceted, and there is I think iteration on the right mix, I mean, for these digital technologies, which I think will prompt for like fine-tuning of the marketing playbook for medical products in general. It's I think the DTx companies also have a role to play. I mean, not everything is in the pharma's hands. I think for operational deployment, for example, or some level of field support, the DTx company is welcome also to provide on deploy capabilities that the pharma companies not necessarily have in-house.
There's actually an interesting trend. I mean, if you look at scientific congresses, they more and more cover digital health topics. And sometimes it's even the theme. I remember last year, ERS was digital health. So, and you will see more DTx companies being present at scientific congresses, having a booth, having symposia. So I think it will be more and more integrated into that. And I personally really believe in a complementary approach. So that the DTx company is doing promotional activities, user acquisition, as well as the pharma partner.
Yeah. And what about patients? I suppose another questions we are often asked, to what extent does this really hinge on an activated patient and sort of informed patient or informed consumer? And what I suppose is your roles to play?
I mean, in general, the solutions. Go ahead, Susan.
I think in our
specifically,
case, I'm sorry.
Maybe quickly. So I think it depends a bit on the type of program. At Sidekick, we often have unbranded disease-specific products, and then a special version of this with some drug-specific content. And the unbranded DTx, I mean, we promote via patient association directly to patients with social media campaigns. And here we can do much more than the pharma partner usually.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what it is when you're thinking about pharma as the promotional engine, right? So if it is something where the ability for a physician to execute is there already, in other words, it's already in their workflow, or they can prescribe it, or some means has been figured out there, then it's more of an awareness approach, right? Where pharma is very good at. I think if it is, a solution that still requires some effort to figure out the workflow, how actually, it is offered to patients, how doctors might be able to access the information about their patient, et cetera, then it's probably, to your point, Pierre, more in the account management space and the people that actually interact with the health systems and help, navigate through solutions there to enable it to even be acted on as a solution. So it kind of depends on what the objective and what stage it's in, I think.
But I also think at the end of the day, it comes down to creating and delivering a easy to use consumer service, right? If you are a drug manufacturer, you might not know the intrinsic value of everyday things of the consumer, but that's where the solution comes in.
Right.
In our case, we originally did trials where we took care of people who had access to the most expensive drugs and the most expansive care, but they were still experiencing 50 plus symptoms on a daily basis, and treating cases uniquely just doesn't start after onboarding. It starts much earlier, because you have the data to have a very fine masked view of who is the consumer, what do they need, and if you can sort of access that in the recruitment, that's how you actually sort of gain the traction.
Most of the solutions we've been developing are prescribed products, so you need to look at the prescription process also. In various cases, the prescription of the digital therapeutics is not necessarily the same process as the prescription of the drug, but you'll see, for example, in the case of combined products, more of these let's say combined experiences of prescriptions, because the companion will be alongside the drug anyway, so you'll have this, let's say, a start of the experience with the digital therapeutic with a start of experience with a drug, and the patients are going to be let's say offered these additional support opportunities as early as the initiation of the treatment.
Yeah, I think ultimately what we're talking about is market shaping, right, for the products that you want to bring. So that includes everything from having market access folks on board to doing education to both the patients and the providers, and then getting your sales team on board, right? They're all kind of distinct aspects. I don't think there's a one playbook that will get you the right answer every time, but I think a combination of all of that, depending on what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the start,
oh, go ahead.
No, just a quick comment, just to sometimes there is a seeding approach which was done through the clinical study process also. Sometimes you have a number of already physicians and patients using these solutions as part of these studies, and then it's already a first step towards a future launch. So you don't start from scratch, let's say. You have already a pretty certain level of knowledge on of the solution in the market that way.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. I cannot keep up with the Q&A questions or the chat. There's actually so many in it. I'm conscious of time, and we only have 3 minutes left. So I think what would be quite nice to wrap up with, and I'll address this question to each and every one of you, is really around, I guess, to sum up the conversation today, and really what is the one key change that you'd really like to see very soon, I suppose, to help this industry move forward. And I'll start with you, Susanna.
I mean, what comes first to my mind is that I really would like to see the pharma drug development teams to think about digital therapeutics much earlier when they define the pathway and development plans for their drugs, and being a bit more open to experiment and pioneer also digital therapeutics and RX combination treatments.
Okay. Pierre?
Well, I think what the industry probably needs is great success stories of large-scale success. With demonstrated data, showing that these solutions are really improving the lives of patients at scale, improving patients' experience with their treatments at scale. I think it's still early days, but I think looking at also the questions that were asked, and I think we need to share more knowledge, more data about what has succeeded, and we need to show that successes at scale. I think we're still at an early phase, and we need to stay humble, I think, about this industry. But it will go a long way if we can demonstrate these case studies in multiple markets around the world. So the body of evidence will continue to grow, and that will shift to a very large industry sector if we can capitalize on these let's say demonstrated successes.
Thanks. Kurt?
You took mine, Pierre, but
Sorry.
It always helps, like if you actually see it work, right?
You can talk about reimbursement. It's usually the number one, problem we have sometimes.
That's where I'm going to go. That's where I'm going to go. So I think that is like the key, right? Is like the unlocking, I think, of the commercial opportunity through like the pay and reimbursement path. And, once that happens, I think, a lot more examples will kind of flood through that. So I'll take that one.
Thanks. Gotcha.
I'll sort of agree with Kirk on the pioneering side, but I think from our aspect, in the autoimmune disease space, the complexity is still super high. And so I think of all of us as sort of all providing one piece of the puzzle, and the data across the board will help us all gain insights into what's actually going on, so that it doesn't, like, Susanna, you're probably experiencing too in COVID, right? There's more questions than there's answers. And as long as that's the case and there's no coding available, we're not going to get very far. But I think with data, and I think we had over 1,000 cases before we even started building the first solution. And so a lot of times it's in the data, the detail is in the data. And I think if we start sharing across the board, I think everybody's going to get a lot smarter in the years to come. There's a lot of unlocking that hasn't been done so far, because we simply just didn't have the technology available to do so.
Absolutely, thank you. And the last word, I suppose, goes to you, Ethan.
Man, that's a lot of pressure to be last year. No, I think I'll be quick. I think I'm super optimistic about the space. I think everybody on the call is also. The biggest thing for me is making these types of partnerships easier. So figuring out a way where it doesn't take 12 or 18 months to figure out how to get startups and pharma to work together.
Yes. I like that. That's a great last word. Well, thank you all so much. I thought this was a really great and informative discussion, and I'm very sorry to everyone who put a question in the chat and that we couldn't answer, but I'm sure there'll be a repeat. So thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you.